Sadly, there are some things that never seem to go out of fashion. Jew hating, that's sure taking off again. Last week, 2 Jewish men in London were attacked by some teenager, totally unprovoked. And yesterday, far-left comedian Whoopi Goldberg, her head full of the new anti-white racism, made this insane claim about the Holocaust in which 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis.
This is white people doing it to white people.
Yeah.
So this is, y'all go fight amongst yourselves. Then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. No, it's not about race.
It is. Well, they consider Jews a different race.
But it's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, because black, white, Jews, everybody eats each other.
The Holocaust is not about race. It's certainly not what the Nazis thought, forcing Jews and Jews only to wear yellow stars because they were supposedly of an inferior race, said the Nazis, before they sent the Jews off to concentration camps to wipe them out. You know what I think Goldberg is really thinking here? As she said, it's just white people doing it to other white people, meaning there's nothing special about the Holocaust. Well, she's now been forced to apologise. She says, I stand corrected. But how could anyone in the mainstream media even think what she said, let alone say it? There's a sickness growing in our culture. But I don't actually expect many of our artists have the guts to stand up against this sort of new tribalism, this new racism, or even the new anti-Semitism. I'll give you an example. For 7 years now, up till just a couple of years ago, the Sydney Festival, big arts festival, right? It was sponsored, not just by you and me, but by China, Southern Airlines, an airline company directly owned by the Chinese Communist dictatorship, state-owned enterprise. Owned by a dictatorship that sent 1 million Muslims to the Gulag, as well as any number of Christians and human rights lawyers and democracy advocates and whatever. No complaints in all those 7 years from any artist that I ever heard of. No boycotts of the festival. Nothing. But when the Israeli embassy this year gave $20,000 to a dance company at the festival, outrage. Boycotts, protests. How could the festival accept this money from an apartheid regime like Israel? Wicked. Artists such as former ABC comedian's a bit generous, former ABC comedian Tom Ballard pulled out and others joined him. Boycott. ABC host Benjamin Law resigned from the festival board in protest at this donation from what's actually the only true democracy in the entire Middle East. Well, now we learn that in fact, some of these brave artists were in fact utterly gutless. These artists who claim they speak truth to power, they can't even stand up against that Twitter mob of people sitting in their underwear on some couch in some squalid hovel. You see, the head of the festival, Olivia Ansell, has now said some of the artists who boycotted the festival didn't actually want to. She said some artists felt pressured to the extent they had no option but to withdraw, or else they would be publicly shamed online. What cowards. Joining me is Michael Danby, former Federal Labor MP and former editor of the Australia-Israel Review. Michael Danby, what does it say to you that some of the artists who pulled out of the festival didn't do it because they hate Israel or think Israel really is an apartheid regime or the worst in the world, but actually because they were scared of being shamed on Twitter by some people with anonymous little Twitter handles?
It's the thread that you sowed from the beginning, Andrew. By the way, Happy New Year, and you look fit and tanned, and welcome back. The wokeness, the virtue signalling, it's pathetic, isn't it, really? You know, anti-Semitism, Whoopi Goldberg now admits, and these people in Sydney, and the artists who protested, the Tom Bollards and the Hamish McDonalds from the ABC who endlessly boost them, is one of the most painful examples of real racism. And that's why a lot of people in the Jewish community in Sydney were very afraid of that boycott, because it sort of sends signals to us, right back to the 30s, So, and it's part of the boycott movement, which is sort of the sharp end of this, Andrew, which is not a movement to reform, the only democracy in the Middle East, as you say, to change its policies this way or that way. Omar Barghouti, its founder, says the purpose of BDS is the elimination of a democratic state, a democratic Jewish state in the Middle East. Not its reform, elimination. So, this is part of the first you do is you make the country unpalatable. You cut off all of its relations, cancel culture. This is part of a worldwide program.
But Michael, you explained something to me, particularly while we were in Parliament, but also since then. You were a very loud voice in standing up against the Chinese dictatorship, even when some in your party, like Bob Carr, wanted to crawl to it and kiss its boots, and Paul Keating, people like that. You stood up to it, particularly for the Tibetans, among others. Can you explain to me why a sponsorship of a festival act from Israel, which is a democracy, gets all these protests, but never in 7 years was there a protest against sponsorship from China, a genocidal dictatorship that's right now got up to 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in concentration camps?
And since it's Chinese New Year, I bought my Taiwanese mask with me. It's another 25 million people who are at risk from Chinese aggression and militarism. I haven't heard anything from Judith Lucy or Tom Bollard, or I think the underplaying of this by the ABC, Hamish MacDonald, who doubles on Radio National in the project, is very sad. And you've got to ask yourself these questions. Here is a major superpower who's doing all of this, and they get away with it scot-free, as you say. And then there's a tiny little country in the Middle East, which 30 of them have to boycott, write articles in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Guardian, on the ABC 3 times, Radio National. I mean, it's like a pile-on. It's the terrible effect of woke cancel culture and virtue signalling focused on one single country. So that's what's particularly odious about it.
Well, I have to say there's one thing, a good thing to say about all this, Michael, is that 30 acts that were weak enough to pull out, some of them because they were just scared of people on Twitter, right, that's all, didn't actually seem to weaken the festival at all. I have to say it was the worst sort of acts. I mean, Tom Ballard, seriously, who pulled out, and the best acts that stayed, which tells you, anti-Israel hatred seems to be a product of weak minds and weaker talents. Michael Danby, thank you so much indeed for your time.